First question is, Will Rogers, while primarily known as a movie star and a humorist, was also a Guinness Book of World Records holder for his roping skills. But Bob, tell us about the talent of Will Rogers. Tell us about his roping talent, how it led to his ability to launch his career.
Well, Miss Meg, I learned to rope in a real way on a real ranch. My dad was Clement Van Rogers, for whom Rogers County in Oklahoma is named. And he owned a big old ranch where I was born up near Oolaga. We called it the Dog Iron Ranch. We even branded our cattle that way, the Dog Iron. But when I hit the Wild West shows and the vaudeville circuit, I couldn't sing, I couldn't whistle. I just did them rope tricks and told a few jokes, and people seemed to like it. And I sure liked them people, because, you know, I never met a man I didn't like.
Yes. Do you have any hidden talents you'd like to share with the audience tonight?
Oh, you weren't through. Go ahead.
To share with the audience tonight.
I've thought about that question for about 15 seconds now. And I've got no hidden talent of any kind, so we can move on to the next question. Except that I thought about maybe impersonating John Wayne. And there's not really enough room up here, but I do a pretty good John Wayne impersonation out of The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance.
Ooh, okay.
And it's, if I was out there right now, walking around, I'd be going, "Not so fast, Pilgrim." "Not so fast, Pilgrim." That's okay, that's John Wayne.
Now, without giving away anybody's age here, Will Rogers and Mike Turpen were born approximately 33 miles apart from each other geographically and 70 years apart chronologically. So, Bob, what would Rogers' life be like growing up what was it like growing up in Oolaga, Indian Territory in the 1880s and 90s, before statehood? And, of course, that was even before the land run.
I always had friends of all colors. I kind of looked white, but some of my cousins looked more Indian. But some of my early playmates were some of the slaves, sons of slaves. One of them, the slaves, had taken my dad's last name and had just stayed at Oolaga. So I really had a love for diversity really early.
I remember in the 50s, the beginning of the Civil Rights Movement, there in North Tulsa, beginning to see things like riding the bus with my dad. And I'd ask my dad, Ken, he was a printer. He ran a printing press and worked about 4 part-time jobs. I remember when he died, he had printer's ink under his fingernails. He could never clean them up. I told the funeral director that was okay. That's the way he always was. But I remember my dad trying to explain to me why the African-American folks were riding at the back of the bus. He said, well, it's just the way that it is. And then we'd go over to the Northside Restaurant. And they had that sign, we reserve the right to refuse service to anyone. They had those separate bathrooms and separate eating area to a certain extent. There was still segregation then, early 50s, North Tulsa. This was in Rosa Parks. This was in Montgomery, Alabama, the famous bus boycotts. That's what's going on there. One other thing I want to share with you about growing up in North Tulsa there was, it was North Tulsa. It was not South Tulsa. And I learned a lot about the plight of middle-class folks, I think, to a certain extent. We spent a lot of time in North Tulsa, for those that know the demography there. And I often like to say demography is destiny. It's one of my great frustrations about life, I think, is demography is destiny. That's a frustration I have. Where people start out generally determines where they're going to end up. What do we do about that? That'd be a whole speech on quality public education from the kindergarten to the PhD level, probably. Opportunity in life. Demography is destiny otherwise. In any event, here I am in North Tulsa, and people talk about the people in South Tulsa. And now I'm a junior in high school at McLean High School, and I saw a poem, I memorized a poem, and it changed my life. Whenever Richard Cory went to town, we people on the street looked at him. He was a gentleman from soul to crown, good-looking and handsomely slim. And he was rich, yes, richer than a king, and well-schooled in every grace. In fine, we thought that he was everything to make us wish that we were in his place. So on we worked and waited for the light and went without the meat and cursed the bread. And Richard Cory, one come summer night, went home and put a bullet through his head. Never again was I jealous of another man.
I think it might be fun to explore a little bit the idea that one can disagree, but not be disagreeable. Yeah. Something we all need to be paying attention to. A lost art. At the moment.
Well, that always puzzled my wife, Betty. She could not understand how one week I would write some pretty critical things about the president, and then the next week we would still get an invite to some big party at the White House. She never could figure that out. She'd always say, now, Will, you need to write the president and apologize to him for making fun of him. I never did, but they knew I was kidding. You know, I got to know all the presidents from Teddy Roosevelt to his cousin Franklin. I even named one of my horses in my early roping act Teddy. I think the president kind of liked that. It kind of took the sting out of any bad things I said. But it was President Wilson who first called me a humorist in the newspaper, and it kind of stuck. Every president laughed at my jokes. After that bitter fight between Hoover and Roosevelt in 1932, I advised both of them to go fishing for a while and quit the name calling.
I just got to tell you, it's a lot of fun to have friends in very high places. And you're right. And Hillary's been in our home twice. Susan's here just about a mile from here, not very far. When she ran for U.S. Senate, when she ran for president. And they're not perfect people, but I love them. I respect them. They're my friends. And I just got to tell you, one of my favorites is just a couple of years, 4 years ago now. Hillary ran in this state for president, and she won big here in Oklahoma. And we did good. And so Bill Clinton called me and said, "What can I do for you?" And I mean, what would you say? I mean, seriously. And so I said, "Well, what can you do for me, Mr. President? Let's just get Hillary elected." He goes, No. I called to say, "What can I do for you? We appreciate your hard work." I said, "Well, Mr. President, my mother just turned 80 years old. Would you call Marge up in Wagner out on Lake Fort Gibson and wish her happy birthday?" He goes, "Well, give me her number." And so about an hour later, my mother called and said, "You wouldn't believe what just happened." Called here. Yeah. Now, folks, that's fun stuff.
Will Rogers' occupation were as follows: actor, author, humorist, and pundit. Mike can claim to be 3 of those 4, plus an attorney. Although I think many would be surprised to know that Turpen has also had a turn on the silver screen in a movie called Killer Tumbleweeds.
I brought a copy of the movie. Killer Tumbleweeds.
Just in case you didn't believe us. Bob, could you take a couple of minutes to expand upon Rogers' career? He's often cited by many as simply a humorist, with his writings often going largely ignored. In your book, Will Rogers, American Wordsmith, this is a topic you took issue with. Would you discuss him as a Renaissance man and how he was so much more than just a humorist?
Well, when me and my one-eyed buddy Wiley Post bit the dust or bit the ice up in Alaska in 1935, newspapers everywhere call me a famous humorist, just like President Wilson had. But that's not what I liked being called the best. I was really just a storyteller. I didn't ever necessarily mean for a story to come out funny. That's just the way I talked and told stories.
Mike, you too are a Renaissance man.
Okay.
With your career beginning in law, moving to politics, both in front and out and behind the scenes, back to the law, while also moving on to being a political pundit, and now also serving, as you said, as a member of the Oklahoma State Regents for Higher Education Board.
That's true.
Can you share with us how each job has shaped you and prepared you for the next?
Well, I am proud to be a regent, and I will tell you this, not all regent meetings are dull. Not all regent meetings are dull. Some are canceled. So, let's be candid about it. I grew up reading and watching To Kill a Mockingbird. And when Gregory Peck became Atticus Finch on the big screen, and by the way, the American Film Institute 3 years ago named Atticus Finch as the greatest hero of all movies and all times. He's a fictional character. So every lawyer I know wants to be a modern-day, real-life Atticus Finch. But I grew up watching that, so I wanted to be a lawyer.
Was there something in life that you would have liked to have done that you didn't get to do? I would have liked to have made it to Point Barrow that day.
That's good. That's good. Yeah. Wow.
Now, and seriously, as Bob's speaking, if you look at the life of Will Rogers, he enjoyed life. In fact, Betty always said that he was a kid who had never grown up. That just when the kids were raised, he would just say, "We're going somewhere." And so he traveled so much. He enjoyed life. He had so many friends. And when he died in 1935, it was such a huge thing. It was the biggest thing happening in the world. When he and Wiley died, when news arrived in Washington, Congress adjourned. Literally adjourned for the day. It was the biggest thing happening in the world in every newspaper. I have a collection of newspapers. In fact, I forgot I brought one of these from South Carolina or North Carolina or somewhere. It was major headlines in the whole world, these 2 young Oklahomans who died. Will Rogers was only 55 when he died. Wiley Post was only 36. Yet here we are 3/4 of a century later talking about the legacy that they left us. Will Rogers. To you, Will.